for people that don't know, in your family, because there's an interview that one of his sons did years ago. I think 10 years ago, one of Osama bin Laden's sons did an interview while he was still alive, saying, "My father's not even the most dangerous one. He's not even the most ruthless ones. There's people that are way more ruthless than he is." What did you know about the potential and the vision of your uncle? Like, what was the vision? Did you know it, or was it just kind of like a quiet thing? Well, you don't need to know what they're up to. You don't need to know what they're doing. And your father kind of defended him, meaning talking to your mother, or your father kind of defended him. What vision did you guys have of who your uncle was pre 9/11?
So, as I mentioned, my mother was very much in the know in terms of understanding the mentality of the society, but also those who were extremely devout and practiced Islam in its literal form. She was able to observe, such people in Saudi Arabia. And the fact that, there was the divorce, the separation and the divorce case in the background, and she was obviously looking out for her three girls. It was just the four of us in the West with this, in this very strange situation. And, my mother always looked out for us, and following the events, the 1993, well, from, when Osama went to Afghanistan, and his activities in the 80s, and then in 1993, the first bombings in the basement of the World Trade Center, and then the 1998 bombings in the embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. So she'd been following this very closely because she knew that it wasn't going to stop, even though she didn't know, obviously, the plans or what was going to happen. But she knew that he was never going to stop. And she was very fearful for the consequences that that could have for me and my two older sisters, considering the name that we carry. And as you said, Osama bin Laden is one of thousands of very radical, or I would call them literal Muslims, the Muslims who really believe in a literal application of the ideology. And my mother, again, alludes to this, or not alludes, but, pinpoints it in her book, especially in the final chapters, where she calls them, the army of shadows, because there are so many. And she was actually, one of the first to make this analogy of, if you take the whole Muslim population, which at the time, was 1 billion or so, and you take 10%, and you take the 10% of these 10% of the more, devout ones, and then you arrive at a number. If you take the ones that are willing to commit these atrocious crimes and killing themselves in the process for their beliefs, you arrive at a number which is over 1 million people, which is non-negligible, obviously. And sadly, everything that my mother predicted in the book, warning, where she warned the West of this army of shadows and how they were infiltrating our society, tragically, it has come to pass, and we're living with the consequences here in the West ever since. I mean, I'm based in Europe, and the climate here is extremely tense, whether you're in France or in Germany, in Sweden, in the Netherlands, Austria. The amounts of attacks, it's just relentless. In France, the past month has been absolute bloodshed, and the media doesn't really, for 20 years the media didn't really talk about it or covered it up. And you had some brave voices who called it out, including my mother, saying, that this is a real problem. This ideology is a real problem. And in the meantime, we were watching the news and looking at the press, and some politicians saying that, Islam is a religion of peace, perpetrating that narrative, as opposed to, in French, there's this expression, calling a cat, naming something what it is, right? And the situation here is quite bleak. I mean, not to sound negative or pessimistic, I'm quite an optimistic person, but the reality here in Europe, and people don't want to talk about this because apparently you get labeled as a racist if you say these things, but just the mere demographics here in Europe, the landscape in the next 30, 40, 50 years will be very different to the Europe that we know today. And nobody is really talking about this, but it's something we really need to look out for the sake of our future generations here in Europe.
There's a lot of, and by the way, when you said the Muslim is the religion of peace, that politician you mentioned is a president. He's a two-term president that you were mentioning. I believe you were.
There are two presidents. There's George Bush who said that. There's Barack Obama who said that. And the whole press, the mainstream media, right, all of the mainstream media perpetrated that narrative for the past, 20 years.
What's
and
impressive
covered this
is,
up.